Hi, this is Adam Diaz with Back to Radio, and you're listening to Fast Facts, the show that'll learn you something interesting in somewhere around 5 minutes or so. Today we're going to try something a little different, getting right on into it. I usually am better at condensing what I want to say, but there's so much that I want to share about these movies. I love film. When I went to college, I was actually upset that I had to take art classes to be a media major. I know it seems kind of intuitive there, but anyway, the point is, I suck at drawing, and I hate that I suck at drawing because I really wish I was good at it. But I'm simply just not. But I did find a silver lining in the fact that film studies is and was considered an art credit. In all honesty, this podcast was supposed to start as a film analysis podcast called Singin' Flicks, but it seemed kind of lame, and honestly, those are a dime a dozen, and writing those kinds of essays costs a lot of money, seeing as you have to watch the movie and everything. So, without further ramblings, I present to you the most expensive action movie sequences ever filmed. Now, this list was a lot harder to quantify than I originally thought. There were many variables to consider, such as practical versus CGI, inflation depending on when the film was made, and there's also the impact of the scene in general. Was it worth the money? Is the scene memorable? Did it even make the final cut of the film? I'll explain what I mean when I talk about Swordfish, the movie with Hugh Jackman and John Travolta that debuted in 2001. So the research surprised me, because some movies and scenes that I for sure thought would make the cut, like the iconic Dulong Bridge scene from Apocalypse Now, didn't even make it close to some of the sequences that use CGI. And as expensive as the film was, it had nothing to do with any one scene in particular. So I'll peter in a few honorable mentions throughout and have a follow-up episode next week about the most memorable and iconic stuntman and star in history, Jackie Chan. Is holy crap, that man deserves your respect for some of the stunts he's pulled off. Not to mention, anyone that grew up like I did with the Jackie Chan Adventure Show owes that man your undying gratitude for having the best cartoon ever to grow up to. So the list. First, an honorable mention. The pinnacle of war dramas starring the one and only Alec Guinness, The Bridge on the River Kwai. Released in 1957, directed by a little-known Brit, David Lean, and based on the 1952 novel by Pierre Boulez. The film uses the historical setting of the construction of the Burma Railway in 1942 to 1943. Besides Alec Guinness and other leads such as Jack Hawkins and William Holden, the biggest dent to the movie's $2 million budget came through the bridge itself. Claimed at release to cost $250,000, investigation into those claims revealed that the bridge merely cost $52,085. However, when you take inflation into account, the bridge would cost something like $456,208.19. So, it was still a pretty pricey set piece to blow up in the outstanding climax of the film. The reason, though, it didn't make the list is because the bridge itself is present throughout the movie due to its nature as a character in the film. This then kind of disqualifies it from the one scene requirement. As far as single action scene costs go, we must go back to a 1994 film that only had two things going for it: Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. And that movie was Speed. The entire plot of that film can be summed up as so. If the bus the leads are trapped on falls beneath a certain speed, 50 miles per hour, it will explode. The entire film is those trapped on the bus either trying to disarm the bomb, Keanu Reeves, or figure a way off the bus, Sandra Bullock. The climax, when the bus does finally blow, however, when it crashes into a plane, it costs a whopping $80,000, which really sets the bar for just how much cheaper and better looking practical effects are compared to their CGI counterparts. Don't believe me? Well, let's skip out of order for a second to talk about the dumpster fire of a sequel to Speed, Speed 2, Cruise Control. In 1997, Sandra Bullock reprises her role to again be unwittingly a part of a crazy plot device. The director, John DeBont, had this recurring nightmare about being on an out-of-control cruise ship that crashes into port at full speed, utterly destroying everything in its path. And that crazy Dutch bastard delivered. Initially, he had planned on going all CGI for the finale, but thought better of it, so that his actors could experience the fear he felt from his dreams. Or it may have had something to do with the estimated $500 million price tag a full CGI scene would run the project. So, what we got was honestly a great practical effects sequence that utilized digital elements from George Lucas's ILM or Industrial Lights and Magic, 2/3 of a cruise ship on a 1,000-foot rail system, 60 feet beneath the ocean, and a fake island town the production team built. The final cost of the scene? Somewhere in the ballpark of $25 million. Almost as much as the entire cost of the original Speed. So wow, CGI just sometimes may not be worth it, especially if the story just isn't there to justify the cost. Speaking of stories that just don't hit, Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor.
I miss you more than Michael Bay missed the mark when he made Pearl Harbor. I miss you more than that movie missed the point.
The film that was billed as a war drama but delivered as a flat World War II flick. Seriously, this is the film that gave Ben Affleck a bad rap.
Need you like Ben Affleck needs acting school. He was terrible in that film. I need you like Cuba Gooding needed a bigger part. He's way better than
But with Michael Bay in charge, you can at least expect explosions. And Mr. Bay delivers on that expectation. The overall film may have been poor, but the Japanese attack on December 7th will send chills down your spine when you witness the destruction that took place that morning. Out of the film's $132.2 million budget, nearly $7.5 million was allocated for this infamous scene alone. Following Pearl Harbor on the list, we have another war film, this time a work by Spielberg that is arguably one of the greatest World War II films out there, the 1998 hit Saving Private Ryan. The opening 25 minutes are some of the most humbling moments of battlefield cinema, showing us as close as a movie can to how the greatest generation received their name. The Omaha Beach scene is one of the most recreated and memorable portions of the movie that earned Spielberg Best Director. With 4 weeks, 750 cast members, and $12 million of the movie's overall $70 million budget, he created one of Hollywood's most expensive sequences and greatest pieces of battlefield cinema. Next on the list, we go from Tom Hanks' portrayal of real-life heroes to the revival of DC Comics' most well-known hero, Superman in Superman Returns. I'll be honest here, I didn't remember much of this movie except for the space shuttle scene. I think I've probably blocked the rest from my memory so it couldn't hurt me anymore. So, color me shocked and surprised when my research told me that they actually spent money on this thing. I was under the assumption it was just a student film project. There was a scene cut from the theatrical version that may or may not appear on the Snyder Cut. Okay, bad joke in, now back to the point. There was a scene that was cut from the theatrical release that was believed by Warner Brothers to be dark and depressing and would make the film and follow-ups have a stark contrast to the vision they had for their line of DC films. The scene was Superman returning to a destroyed Krypton. The CGI Krypton cost near $10 to $12 million to create, and it wasn't even in the film. Not only making it one of the most expensive scenes ever created, but maybe the most expensive scene to be cut from a theatrical release ever. Speaking of Superman, let's you and I jump in the Wayback Machine and go back to 1978.
Can you read my mind?
I can indeed. Superman, the original, the one with Christopher Reeve. The film itself cost only $55 million, and none of that was for any crazy action sequences, but a lot of it was for the top-billed cast member, Marlon Brando, or The Godfather. Fun fact, did you know that the film's lead, Christopher Reeve, was only allowed third billing? The credits, movie posters, even the wiki article, he is subordinate to Brando and Gene Hackman. Now, I had heard the story that Hackman wouldn't shave his head for the role of Lex Luthor and would be damned if he wore a bald cap, so that is why we got a Lex Luthor with luscious head of hair. But I never knew the story behind Marlon Brando's appearance fee. He was cast to appear as Jor-El for about 10 minutes out of the film's 143-minute running time. Negotiated for top billing, as I had mentioned, and was paid $3.7 million. And promised 12% of the overall take-home, which was an additional $19 million by the end of the day. Worth it? Abso-frickin-lutely. So back to the list, and back again to scenes that didn't fully make the final cut. We have the 2001 thriller starring Hugh Jackman and John Travolta's Swordfish. The film is an awkward yet enjoyable mess that sees the Wolverine playing a world-class hacker and John Travolta playing a bald man that may be a terrorist or just a guy in charge of a secret team that fights terrorists. Honestly, besides the cheesy hacking sequences, this movie is a guilty pleasure of mine. I love how Travolta asks what ethics mean when you fight an enemy without any, and the way the film makes you constantly question if the bad guys are actually the good guys or not. Anyway, to the point, the climax of Swordfish has this crazy escape scene involving a bus and a heavy crane helicopter. Now, the majority of this approximately $15 million sequence made it to the film, except for the part that costed a lot of money in the first place. The movie released after September 11th, after the first attack on US soil in decades from a foreign enemy, after the towers fell. In a stroke of consciousness, the execs behind Swordfish cut a potentially tragic scene from their film to not make the public relive the horrors from that fateful day. The scene, which had the helicopter carry the bus of people through a city skyline, crashes through a skyscraper, causing it to collapse after dragging the bus through the upper quarter of the building. This scene was all practical. Every part of the sequence was practical. The studio bought a building to collide a bus with in midair and demolish it for the intense scene of destruction. Now, the sequence still has the bus crashing through the upper stories, but removes the building collapse and subsequent destruction that required a lot of the CGI to edit out dust and other such elements from the collapse, upping the scene's cost. The reason? They didn't just reshoot. Well, that was due to the danger of filming the scene. The helo was overloaded. One wrong move could mean damage to the city they filmed in, or even death to the pilot. So the studio did the safe thing and the ethical thing and just spent more money to keep everyone safe and remove the potentially triggering scene that really would have been too soon. Hope you didn't think Michael Bay was only going to appear on this list for one bad movie, because he's coming back again with the last Transformers film he was in charge of, The Last Knight.
Why does Michael Bay get to keep on making movies?
This series of summer blockbusters were all incredibly expensive films, but never had just one scene that cost much more than any other. That's not the case for the fourth film in the franchise. The junkyard scene that was used in many of the film's trailers and teasers ran up a bill totaling near $15 million. This was due to the combination of practical and CGI effects, in addition to the fact that all of the cars used in the scene were custom made and designed. I never personally saw the film. Honestly, they just kind of got tiring after the second, but couldn't any junk car honestly just work? It's a junkyard. Who's paying premium for prop scrap? Michael Bay aside, the next film on this list I was super happy to see. The first rated R film I had ever seen, one of my all-time favorites, and a film that will go down in history as the best sequel ever made. Terminator 2: Judgment Day. This film made me fall in love with James Cameron as a writer and a director. It evolved so much from the first film that it became something all of its own. The Terminator universe is one of my all-time favorites. The scenes from the future are just incredible, and the story in the present is a masterclass in storytelling. Now, I'm sorry about all the fanboying, but I seriously love this movie. The scene that cost so much, however, is what we're here to talk about. And that scene was Sarah's dream of Judgment Day. The scene where Sarah Connor is at a playground fence looking at LA as it is bathed in nuclear fire caused by Skynet's preemptive strike on the humans to kick off the War of the Machines is as memorable as it is horrifying. And as it was expensive. The entire scene cost $17 million for only 2 minutes of screen time. Was it worth it? Well, let me ask you a quick question. Was it horrifying to watch columns of ash that used to be people get blown away? Not last, not least, but the film that made me want to start this list. The 1959 blockbuster that would cement William Wyler's name in Hollywood history, Ben-Hur. A remake of a silent film classic, Ben-Hur has one of the most iconic action sequences in the history of film. Nothing of its scale had ever been done before nor since. And no studio was willing to shell out as much money as they did to Wyler for a single scene in the past. Following 5 years of preparation, the production was seemingly endless. There were 300 sets covering over 140 acres, 9 sound stages, and thousands of extras. Set at Cinecittà Studios in Italy, it was the largest film set built to date. The arena alone was built by a construction team of 750 workers. The race between Judah Ben-Hur, Charlton Heston, and Masala, Stephen Boyd's character, was shot over 10 weeks. That singular scene cost $4 million. In today's money, that's over $34 million, or something like $3.7 million for each minute of footage. MGM, thank you for letting that WW2 vet have the reins on this project and not making us wait for the Snyder Cut. Little callback humor for you. So, as I mentioned, honorable mentions, well, here's the time for them. Right before we get to the last film on the list, the most expensive scene ever, Mad Max Fury Road. I thought this film from the 2010s would have made the list, seeing as it's filled with action from beginning to end, but most of the action was practical effects, which, as we've learned today, tends to be cheaper than CGI. That's not to say the film didn't use CGI. In fact, it was present throughout to give the film that booming color and crazy contrast, and to remove the rigging for stunts as well as Furios's arm. But all of the flame explosions, those were all practical. Props to you, Mr. George Miller. I'm looking forward to that sequel. Spectre also deserves a shout out. This modern 007 film may be the least successful of the franchise that stars Daniel Craig, but the Morocco layer explosion, well, that's the largest film stunt explosion according to the Guinness World Records. The last honorable mention I would like to make is the Soviet Union's 4-part epic of War and Peace, directed by Sergei Bondarchuk, or Bondarchuk. I don't speak Russian, I apologize if I butchered that name. I will refer to him as Sergei in the future. The film came out in 4 parts in the years 1966 and 1967. Now, the reason this movie and the scene that I'm going to be mentioning in particular is an honorable mention and not at the top of the list is because it's hard to quantify an actual price on the film. Sergei and Moscow claimed the project cost around $100 million, which would make this the most expensive film ever made. But as we learned back in episode 2, No Coke Pepsi for you, comrade, hashtag shameless plug, there's one big problem. The Soviet ruble doesn't exchange on the international market, so we can't quantify the cost in US dollars. But what we do know about War and Peace, Part 3, and the Battle of Borodino in particular, the Red Army lent over 100,000 Soviet regulars to Sergei to film the battle scene that depicted the historical defense of Russia from Napoleon's armies. So it was definitely the most people on scene ever, for sure, and arguably one of the most expensive scenes ever filmed. We just can't say exactly how much it actually was. So honorable mention, it shall remain. And without further ado, the most expensive single scene ever filmed, Matrix Reloaded with the Burly Brawl. The cost was an astronomical $40 million. The scene, which saw hundreds of Agent Smiths played by the one and only Hugo Weaving, gang up and beat on Keanu Reeves' Neo. To make these photorealistic copies possible in 2003, Warner Brothers Studio had to pull Lucas and create a new company to make the technology. It just wasn't there. So the WB bought ESC Entertainment and put them to work on creating the foundation to what we now call motion tracking, something that is now available in applications like Adobe After Effects. But we have the Wachowskis and Matrix Reloaded to thank for such technology. I would also like to add that the original Matrix's opening scene cost $10 million at least, because the Wachowskis went to WB Studios with their idea for a screenplay and were given $10 million, and what they returned with was the famous bullet time cam and a plea for more money to finish the project. WB, as you may have guessed, loved what they saw, and just like Philip J. Fry said, shut up and take our money. Well, that's it for Fast Facts today. A bit longer than the usual runtime, but I figured if I'm going to write a list for you, I'm going to do it right. If you like today's theme, may I suggest also checking out episode 4 of Fast Facts, which covers some little known facts about Goofy. Also, make sure to like and follow me on Facebook and Twitter. It helps to grow the brand and let me reach and share with others, as well as keep you up to date on all things related to this podcast and so much more. Don't forget, you can follow me on Twitch as well at Back to Radio to chat live, play video games, or give me ideas as I learn how to animate. I'm Adam Diaz from Back to Radio, and this has been Fast Facts. Adios.